Welcome to the world of precious Ramotswe, kind, observant, and always guided by common sense and a good cup of bush tea. Tell us where in the world you are listening from. It brings us joy to see how far these stories travel. If you enjoy these mysteries, don't forget to like and subscribe. It helps us bring you more cases from Botswana. Morning came gently to Zebra Drive, as it so often did, with a sky that turned from soft grey to the kind of blue that made one think of honesty. There was nothing hurried about a Botswana dawn. The sun rose as if it understood that people needed time to gather themselves before facing the long heat of the day. The light fell across the acacia trees that dotted the land, casting thin shadows on the red earth. And in that quiet half hour before the bustle of the town began, there was peace. Ma Precious Ramotswe, owner of the #1 Ladies Detective Agency, was already awake. She sat on her veranda, in the shade of the house that had once belonged to her father, the late Obed Ramotswe. It was a small white house, not the grandest on Zebra Drive, but comfortable and solid, the kind of house that held the memory of family. In her hand was a cup of red bush tea, steaming gently in the cool air of early morning. She sipped, and as she did so, she allowed her thoughts to wander, as they so often did, toward her father. He had been a cattleman, a man of quiet wisdom. Precious, he had once told her, you must always look at the heart of a man, not at the shine of his shoes or the size of his herd. Cattle may wander, shoes may wear out, but the heart, if it is good, remains. Those words had stayed with her through the years and guided her now in the business of solving the problems of other people. For detective work, she often said, was not about great mysteries, but about understanding human hearts. She set the cup down and watched the movement of the garden. A pair of glossy starlings hopped across the lawn, arguing in low, metallic notes. Somewhere beyond the fence, a donkey brayed, an indignant sound that seemed to protest the very idea of mourning. These were ordinary sights and sounds, yet they were blessings too. Ma Ramotswe believed firmly that happiness came not from grand fortunes or sudden strokes of luck, but from noticing the small, good things that filled each day. From within the house came a clatter of breakfast preparations. That would be Mr. J.L.B. Matakoni, her husband, already readying himself for the day at Tlokwen Road Speedy Motors. He was the best mechanic in all Botswana, known for coaxing old engines back to life with a mixture of patience and kindness that was rare among men with spanners. He disliked rushing, and he disliked crosswords, but he was steady, dependable, a man one could trust, as one trusted the seasons. In his care were the 2 apprentices, boys with more energy than application. They were good boys at heart, but easily distracted by bottles of fizzy drink, by football matches, and by the mysteries of radio music. "One day," Mr. J.L.B. Matakoni would say, shaking his head, "they will understand that you cannot fix a car by staring at it." Yet he persevered with them, as Ma Ramotswe persevered with her clients, for he too believed in patience. Soon, Ma Grace Makutsi would arrive at the office. Grace Makutsi, with her large round glasses and her secretarial college diploma marked 97%, was not a woman to be overlooked. She reminded the world of her 97% whenever possible, as a person might remind others of a medal won in youth. She was fiercely loyal, sometimes too quick to take offence, but she was also a good detective in her own right, capable of seeing what others overlooked. Ma Ramotswe thought fondly of her, even when she was being difficult. The morning was warming now, and the red earth seemed to glow with it. A taxi rattled past on Zebra Drive, raising a trail of dust behind it, while a herd of cattle was driven slowly along the road by a herd boy with a stick. These were the sights of Botswana, sights that had not changed much from her father's time, and perhaps would not change for many years yet. They were reminders of continuity, of the way life held fast even as the world beyond might rush into new fashions and inventions. Ma Ramotswe finished her tea and stood, stretching slightly. Another day of detective work lay before her, though she never knew what it might bring. That was the nature of her profession. Some days it was missing goats, other days dishonest salesmen, or the delicate matters of husbands and wives. She hoped for a case that was not too sad, for sadness weighed heavily on her generous heart. Still, she knew that whatever came, she must face it with the calm patience her father had taught her. She gathered her handbag, the large brown one that had accompanied her faithfully for years, and thought once more of her father. He had given her many things, but above all, he had given her the example of kindness. And kindness, she reminded herself, was the detective's greatest tool. With that thought, she turned toward her little white van, ready to drive to the office. The day was beginning, and though she did not yet know it, before its end she would be drawn into the life of a young woman with a most unusual problem, a bride who had refused the ring that was offered to her. And it was this problem, both ordinary and extraordinary, that would test once again the wisdom of Botswana's first lady detective. A short drive later, the small office of the No. 1 Ladies Detective Agency, with its faded sign catching the morning sun, was already awake. Ma Ramotswe dusted the tops of the red client chairs, checked the filing cabinet that held so many human troubles, and set the kettle on the little hot plate. She liked to prepare the office before clients arrived. A well-ordered place, she thought, gave people courage to tell their stories. Ma Grace Makutsi arrived soon after, striding in with her glasses glinting and her shoes making a sharp statement on the floor. She set down her handbag, squared her papers, and gave the office a brisk once-over, as if to certify it for the day. "Morning, Ma," she said, crisp and ready. Ma Ramotswe smiled. "I have not forgotten, Ma Makutsi. It is a fine achievement. Even the kettle knows it now." Grace allowed herself a brief laugh, then busied herself at her desk. There was satisfaction in these small morning rituals, in the knowledge that the agency stood ready for whatever human puzzle might come through its door. And this morning, as if guided by fate, the sound of hesitant footsteps soon approached. The woman who entered was young, perhaps no more than 23. Her dress was neat and carefully pressed, though not new. She carried herself with dignity, but there was an uncertainty in her eyes, a shadow that spoke of some hidden worry. "Dumela, Ma," said Ma Ramotswe, rising to greet her. "Please, come in and sit. We are always happy to welcome those who need our help." "Dumela, Ma," the young woman replied softly. "My name is Naledi." Ma Makutsi hurried to pour tea into the thick white mugs that the office always used. She handed one to Naledi with a firm nod, as if to say, "Here, drink this. It will steady you." Naledi took the cup, but her hands trembled slightly. "I do not know if my problem is the kind for a detective," she began. "Every problem that troubles the heart is the right kind," said Ma Ramotswe kindly. "Some problems may look small to others, but if they disturb your sleep, then they are great indeed. Tell us what worries you." Naledi took a breath, her eyes lowered. "I am to be married. The man is Kabelo, son of a cattle owner in the Ngwaketse lands. My family is very pleased, for it will join two good households. He is a man of means, and he is respected. But," she stopped, as if the word itself might be too heavy. "But you are not happy?" prompted Ma Ramotswe gently. Naledi shook her head. "It is not that. He has done nothing unkind. Yet when he offered me the engagement ring, I felt something strange. It was not joy. It was cold, Ma, like a stone that had no warmth. I could not wear it. I told him no." The words hung in the quiet office. Even the kettle, cooling now, seemed to have stopped its whisper. "You refused the ring," repeated Ma Makutsi, astonished. "But that is very serious, Ma. An engagement ring is not just metal, it is, well, it is everything." Naledi's shoulders sagged. "That is what everyone says. My mother says I have shamed her. Kabelo's family is angry, though they hide it with polite words. My friends call me foolish, but I could not wear that ring. It was not mine." Ma Ramotswe folded her hands together, resting them on her lap. She thought of Obed Ramotswe's wisdom. The heart mattered more than cattle, more than shoes, more than rings. "Tell me, Ma," she asked softly, "why do you think the ring felt wrong?" Naledi hesitated. Because I do not know if Kabelo chose it for me, or if it was simply given. It was as if he saw me not as Naledi, but as a place to put that ring." There was silence again, filled only by the distant drone of a lorry passing on the road to Molopolole. Ma Makutsi pushed her glasses higher on her nose. "Perhaps you are being too particular. Many women would not mind such a thing. They would say, 'This is a ring, it is expensive, therefore it shows love.'" Naledi's eyes filled with sudden tears. "But should love not feel warm, Ma? Should it not feel like a gift made only for me?" At that, Ma Ramotswe's heart softened even more, if that were possible. This was not a case of theft or dishonesty or missing property. It was a case of a young woman's soul crying out for reassurance. Such cases were often the hardest. She leaned forward. "Ma, you were right to come. A ring may be small, but it is the sign of something very great. If it troubles you, then we must look closely. That is the work of this agency. We will help you." Naledi gave a long, trembling sigh, as if some part of the burden had already been lifted. When she had gone, leaving behind the faint fragrance of her worry, Ma Makutsi broke the silence. "That girl is proud. To refuse a ring. In Botswana, that is like refusing a whole marriage." Ma Ramotswe looked out through the window, where the sunlight was now firmly on the red earth. "Pride, yes," she said, "but also courage. To say no when everyone expects yes, that is not an easy thing." She thought again of her father, of his words about hearts, and she felt, as she so often did, that he was with her still, guiding her hand as she set down her empty mug and prepared to begin this new case, the mystery of the bride who had refused the ring. The next morning began with the same calm rhythm. Ma Ramotswe, having seen Mr. J.L.B. Matakoni off to the garage with his apprentices, drove the tiny white van toward the agency. The air was still cool, though the promise of heat shimmered on the horizon. In Botswana, one learned to move steadily in the morning, for by midday the sun would insist on slowness. Naledi's story stayed with her. A young woman refusing a ring. This was not a matter of theft or fraud, but it carried the same weight, for the unhappiness of the heart could be heavier than the theft of cattle. Ma Ramotswe believed that, just as she believed in the power of kindness. In the office, Ma Grace Makutsi was already present, her typewriter neatly uncovered and her handbag set in its usual spot. She had been thinking too, for the moment Ma Ramotswe entered, she said, "Ma, we must look closely at this Kabelo. A man who offers a ring without thought may be careless in other ways." "That may be so," said Ma Ramotswe, easing herself into her chair. "But we must never judge too quickly. People have reasons, and sometimes those reasons are not seen from the outside. Still, investigation must begin somewhere, and so she suggested that they start with gentle inquiries. If a man is proud of his engagement, others will know. If there is something hidden, they will also know. Botswana is like that. The land is wide, but secrets do not stay hidden for long. The first visit was to a small cafe near the bus rank. It was not fancy, but it was where people met and exchanged the kind of talk that travelled faster than any bus. Mama Kutsi ordered a Fanta and listened with her keen ear while Ma Ramotswe steered the conversation toward Kabelo. The owner, a cheerful woman with an apron dusted in flour, remembered him well. "Oh yes, Kabelo," she said. "He came here once, with his friends, spoke proudly of his father's cattle, spoke also of the ring, yes, but more of the cattle. He is a man who measures life in herds, I think." On the walk back to the van, Mama Kutsi sniffed. "That is exactly what I expected. Men who count cattle more carefully than smiles." Ma Ramotswe did not reply immediately. She was turning over the words in her mind. Pride in cattle was not wrong. Her own father had been a cattleman. But if the cattle came before the bride, then the heart might be missing from the arrangement. The next conversation took place at the clinic, where Ma Ramotswe had a friend, a nurse with sharp eyes. The nurse, when asked, raised her eyebrows. "I have seen Kabelo once or twice. He brings in his cousins sometimes, boys injured in football. He pays the bill, but quickly, with little talk. Not unkind, but not tender either, like a man paying a tax." This remark stayed with Ma Ramotswe. A ring offered without tenderness, a bill paid like a tax. These were small details, but detectives, she knew, lived on such details. Later that afternoon, the two women visited a shop that sold rings and watches, for it was there, surely, that Kabelo must have gone. The jeweller, a man with a careful memory, furrowed his brow at their question. "That ring? I know it, but it was not Kabelo who bought it. It was brought in by another man long ago, returned after an engagement ended badly. A cousin of Kabelo collected it later. I remember, because it had a tiny scratch on the inside of the band." Mama Kutsi's eyes widened behind her glasses. "So it was not chosen at all. It was recycled, Ma. Imagine, to give such a thing." Ma Ramotswe nodded, though she did not say more. A clue, yes, but clues must be handled gently, like calves that might scatter if driven too hard. She would keep this knowledge close, for it told her something important. Naledi's unease had been real, and it had a reason. As the day ended, they returned to the office. The light slanted golden across the desk, and the red chairs glowed in the evening sun. "Ma," said Grace firmly, "this Kabelo is careless. If I had received such a ring, I would have sent it back at once. Even Futi, who sometimes trips over his own shoes, would never give me a recycled ring." Ma Ramotswe smiled at the mention of Futi Radifuti, the kind-hearted man who loved Mama Kutsi deeply. "You see, Ma, love does not need to be clever. It only needs to be sincere. That is what Naledi feels is missing." She gazed out of the window at the passing traffic, at the boys riding their bicycles and the women carrying baskets. Botswana was filled with small truths like this, that sincerity could not be bought in a shop or measured in cattle, and so the early investigation had already uncovered its shape. Not a crime, not a deception, but a failure of the heart to speak clearly. It was a gentle mystery, but no less important for that. For in the end, what was detective work if not the search for truth in human hearts? The following day, Ma Ramotswe decided that the investigation must not only look outward, but also inward. When a case touched on questions of the heart, it was always useful to hear what those around her thought, for each person, in their way, carried a piece of the puzzle. And in Botswana, where people's lives were joined together like the threads of a kente cloth, advice and opinion often came unasked, but sometimes proved valuable. At the agency, Grace Makutsi was at her desk in a posture that suggested triumph. Her shoes, pointed sharply in front of her, seemed to have something to say too. "I have been thinking, Ma," she began without preamble. "If a man gives a woman a second-hand ring, it shows carelessness, and if a woman accepts it, it shows she isn't careful enough. You see, it's like in typing class at the Botswana Secretarial College. Type 'Dear Sir' with 2 R's, fail to correct it, and you'll have trouble later." Ma Ramotswe allowed a small smile. She had learned long ago that it was better to let Ma Makutsi finish her comparisons before responding. "Yes, Ma, but sometimes even a man who makes mistakes may still have a good heart." Perhaps Kabelo thought only of how his family might see the ring, and not of Naledi's feelings. That is foolish, but not wicked. Grace frowned, unconvinced. Still, he should have known better. Her glasses caught the light in a way that made her look like an examiner ready to mark Kabelo down. Later that afternoon, Ma Ramotswe drove the little white van over to Tlokweng Road Speedy Motors. She wished to speak with her husband, Mr. J.L.B. Matakoni, for she valued his steady wisdom in such matters. As she turned into the yard, she was greeted not by him, but by the sight of the apprentices. They were sitting on overturned oil drums, arguing loudly about whether a certain footballer could run faster than a donkey. "You two," called Ma Ramotswe, switching off the van, "should be working, not talking about donkeys." The boys sprang to their feet, all protestations of innocence. "We were only resting, Ma. Mr. J.L.B. Matakoni told us to let the engine cool." She gave them a look that was both stern and amused. "Engines cool by themselves, boys. They do not need your assistance." Inside the garage, Mr. J.L.B. Matakoni was bent over a stubborn gearbox. He straightened when he saw her, wiping his hands on a cloth. "Ah, Ma, you have come at a good time. These apprentices may one day fix cars, but not before they learn to fix their habits." She told him about Naledi, about the ring and her unease. He listened carefully, nodding at intervals, as was his way. At length he said, "It is like when you buy a spare part for an engine. If you take one that does not fit properly, the car will run, yes, but it will never run smoothly. Marriage is like that. A man must find the part that is right, not just the part that is lying about." Ma Ramotswe thought this a very good observation. Mechanics, she reflected, often explained the world better than philosophers. From there, she went on to the orphan farm, for she had promised Ma Potokwane that she would stop by. No visit there was ever free from persuasion, and today was no exception. No sooner had she sat down than a large slice of fruitcake appeared in front of her. "You must eat, Ma Ramotswe," said Ma Potokwane firmly. "Detective work cannot be done on an empty stomach." The matron, formidable in her bright dress, listened with interest as Ma Ramotswe described Naledi's dilemma. "Ha!" she exclaimed. "That girl is brave. Many women would accept anything, even a broken chair, if it came with the promise of marriage. But this one says no to a ring that feels wrong. Good for her." "Still," said Ma Ramotswe gently, "the families are troubled. Kabelo may not understand why she refused." Ma Potokwane cut another generous slice of cake. "Then he must learn, Ma. A man who cannot listen to a woman's feelings is like a driver who ignores the fuel gauge. He will not go far before trouble comes. Her words, delivered with the firmness of a schoolteacher, stayed with Ma Ramotswe as she drove home. It seemed that everyone, from Makutsi to the matron of the orphan farm, agreed that Naledi had been right to refuse. And yet, in her heart, she felt that Kabelo too must be understood. A detective must weigh all sides, not only the side that speaks loudest. As the sun began to set, she thought once again of her father's wisdom. The heart was where truth lay, and perhaps the key to this puzzle was not the ring itself, but the silence that lay behind it, the silence of a man who had not yet learned how to speak his heart. Detective work in Botswana, Ma Ramotswe often reflected, was never done with magnifying glasses or fingerprint powder. It was done with ears and with kindness, for people carried truths in their words, even when they wrapped them in gossip. But gossip, like the wind, could change its direction at any moment, and the wise detective must be careful not to be blown off the path. It was with this thought that she and Ma Makutsi set off one bright afternoon to speak with people who might know more of Kabelo. The tiny white van rattled cheerfully along the road, its little engine protesting at the steep hill, until they reached the market. There, among the stalls of tomatoes and pumpkins, stories were exchanged as easily as coins. They approached a woman selling oranges who knew everyone's business as if she had written it down. "Ah, Kabelo," she said with a knowing look. "A fine young man, works hard, speaks politely. Any girl should be glad of him." She leaned forward, lowering her voice. "But I have heard that he was seen not long ago in Lobatse, sitting with a girl at the cafe. Not Naledi, somebody else." This was interesting, but one must be careful. A girl at a cafe could be a cousin or a friend. Still, the idea that Kabelo's heart might be elsewhere could not be ignored. Next, they spoke with a man at the butchery. He was cutting strips of beef with a heavy knife, but paused when asked about Kabelo. "That one? He is too proud, always boasting of his father's cattle. If you want to know what matters to him, just count his herd. But a wife is not a cow, Ma. She cannot be bought with pride." On the way back to the van, Ma Makutsi was quick to interpret. "You see, Ma, one woman says he is seen with another. One man says he is proud. That is 2 witnesses already. If this were typing class, we would mark him down at once." Ma Ramotswe shook her head. "We must be cautious, Ma. Witnesses are not always right. People like to tell stories, especially about those who are soon to marry. Jealousy can add spice to their words." Still, she could not ignore the growing picture. Kabelo might not be cruel, but he seemed careless. Careless in his pride, careless in how he showed affection. The next day, she stopped at a small shop where Naledi was known. The shopkeeper, a woman with a shrewd gaze, offered yet another view. "Kabelo buys gifts, yes, perfume, scarves, even a handbag once. But they are always the same things, Ma. The sort of gifts a man buys because someone told him that women like them. They are not chosen for Naledi herself. That is why people laugh a little. He buys things, but not with his heart." That remark stayed with her as she drove away. It echoed what Naledi had said herself, that the ring felt as if it was not truly meant for her. By the end of the week, the detectives had gathered many opinions. Some painted Kabelo as careless, but decent. Others hinted at secrets or at pride that might one day become arrogance. But the trouble with gossip was that it could not always be weighed. It blew this way and that, leaving the detective with more questions than answers. One evening, sitting on her veranda with her cup of redbush tea, Ma Ramotswe thought it over. She did not like to judge people too harshly, for she knew from long experience that few were wholly good or wholly bad. Most people, she believed, were simply trying to manage with the small wisdom they had, sometimes stumbling, sometimes succeeding. Cabello, it seemed, was one of those. And yet, something still puzzled her. Why had he chosen or accepted a ring that was not new, not personal, but passed from one broken engagement to another? Was it only carelessness, or was there something he could not say aloud? That unanswered question hung in the air, like the dust that rose from the cattle trails at sunset, waiting for the wind to settle it. She returned to the orphan farm, that steady well of good sense just outside Gaborone. As ever, noise and laughter spilled from the kitchens, and as ever, Ma Sylvia Potokwane met her at the door with fruitcake and the authority of a magistrate. Over tea and the smell of bread and stew, Ma Ramotswe told the latest, the cold ring, the proud talk, the gossip that blew this way and that. "Brave girl," declared Ma Potokwane. "A promise must be new, not borrowed. Men can learn, if told plainly." The children's clatter carried on, while the matron's words settled like stones in clear water. Driving back, Ma Ramotswe felt the path clarifying, not with anger, but with truth. Cabello must be faced kindly and directly. Naledi must be steadied. By the time she reached Zebra Drive, the dust a soft film on the van, she knew the next step was a conversation, not a chase, a talk that might change the course of two young lives. That week, with the sun pressing down and the air shimmering above the red earth, thoughts slowed and sharpened. The case kept circling back to the same point. Not a theft, not a fraud, but whether love can live when treated as obligation. Ma Ramotswe thought of her own life, of Note Makoti's cold charm and the ring that had never warmed her, of Mr. J.L.B. Matakoni's quiet affection that needed no display. The contrast steadied her compass now. That contrast gave her a kind of compass now. What Naledi had felt when Cabello offered her the ring was something Ma Ramotswe herself had known, the sudden, unarguable knowledge that affection must not be faked or borrowed. At the office the following morning, she shared some of these thoughts with Ma Makutsi. Grace, for her part, was unusually quiet. She listened, pursing her lips, and then said, "Ma, you are right. I also think about how it might have been if I had married one of those men who looked at me and saw only a woman with large glasses. They would not have seen my 97%. They would not have seen my cleverness. But Futi, he saw it, even if sometimes he stumbles over chairs or forgets his briefcase. He saw me, and that is why I knew I could say yes to him." It was rare for Grace to speak with such softness, and Ma Ramotswe reached out to touch her hand. "That is what Naledi must find, Ma, a man who sees her." Their conversation was interrupted by the sudden arrival of the apprentices, who had been sent to deliver a spare part from Speedy Motors. They stood awkwardly at the doorway, holding a greasy carburetor wrapped in newspaper and peering around as if the detective office were a strange country. "Mr. J.L.B. Matakoni says you need this, Ma," said the taller boy. "But we do not know why." Ma Ramotswe smiled. "It is not for me, boys. You must take it to the garage next door. But since you are here, tell me, what do you think makes a good husband?" The apprentices stared, startled. The smaller boy, quick to answer anything, blurted out, "One who has many cows, Ma." The taller boy shook his head. "No, it is one who buys his wife a car. A big car, like a Mercedes." Grace snorted. "That shows exactly why you are still boys. You think like children. A wife needs kindness, not a Mercedes." The boys, embarrassed, shuffled their feet, and muttered something about football before escaping. But the exchange gave Ma Ramotswe another thought. Perhaps Kabelo himself was not much older in his way of thinking than those apprentices. Perhaps he too believed that cows and rings were enough to buy a woman's heart. Later that day, she visited Ma Potokwane again, for there were few better places for moral clarity than the orphan farm. Sitting beneath a jacaranda tree, children running in circles around them, the matron listened gravely. "Ma Ramotswe," she said, "this is not just about one ring. This is about how we, as a people, understand marriage. Too many believe that it is an arrangement between families, between herds of cattle, between pockets of pula notes. But marriage is not cattle, and it is not pula. It is two people saying, 'I see you, and I will stand with you.'" She handed over a second slice of fruitcake, as if to underline the seriousness of her words. "If Kabelo does not learn this, then Naledi is right to be cautious. A woman must not enter a house where her heart cannot breathe." Driving back, Ma Ramotswe thought again of her father. He had once told her, on a long day out in the cattle post, that kindness was like water. "It makes everything grow, precious," he had said. "Without it, cattle starve and people quarrel. But with it, there is shade, there is food, there is peace." It seemed to her now that Kabelo's problem was not wickedness, but dryness. He had not watered his love with kindness. He had offered tradition and status instead. And Naledi, wise beyond her years, had felt the thirst that would come if she accepted such a gift. That evening, sitting on the veranda, she looked out over the land and saw it in the fading light as something alive, full of voices and memories. The cattle bells rang faintly across the distance, the dust rose in thin veils where the herd boys walked, and above all was the wide Botswana sky, endless and forgiving. And she knew that the path ahead must be one of teaching, not condemning. Kabelo must be helped to see that the ring was not a token of wealth, but a promise of heart. Detective work, she reminded herself, was not about punishing. It was about guiding people back to what was right. And in that gentle understanding lay the strength of the #1 ladies' detective agency. Botswana's first and only, but also its most necessary, for the puzzles of ordinary people were as important as diamonds. It was a quiet afternoon when Ma Ramotswe decided the moment had come. Cases like this, matters of the heart and of family expectation, could not be rushed. They required gentleness, the patience of cattle moving along a dusty track, and the steady hand of one who wished to prevent quarrel rather than provoke it. She had gathered enough small truths, the ring passed from one broken engagement, the impersonal gifts, the proud words of cattle and land. Now she must bring these truths together, not as weapons, but as mirrors in which the young couple might see themselves. The plan was simple. She invited Naledi back to the agency first, for she wanted to prepare her. When the young woman entered, wearing the same neat dress as before, there was still an anxious weight in her shoulders, as if she expected judgment. "Sit, Ma," said Ma Ramotswe kindly. "There is no reason to be afraid. You have already been brave. You refused what others expected because your heart told you it was wrong. That is courage, not shame." Naledi's eyes filled quickly. "But my mother says I have brought dishonour. Kabelo's people are angry, though they do not say it. I do not wish to be the cause of quarrels, Ma. I only want a marriage that feels true." "And that," replied Ma Ramotswe, "is exactly what you deserve." Grace Makutsi, who had been listening with her usual air of moral authority, added, "You were right, Naledi. If a man thinks a woman will accept any ring, even one with scratches on the inside, then he is mistaken. A woman who knows her worth must not accept a careless gesture." Naledi looked startled. "Scratches?" "Yes," said Ma Ramotswe gently. "That ring was not bought for you. It was an old ring, given in another engagement that ended badly. Kabelo took it from his cousin, perhaps not even thinking what it would mean. That is why you felt it was cold." Naledi's breath caught, and then she bowed her head. "I knew it was not mine. My heart told me so, but I feared I was foolish." "No, Ma," said Ma Ramotswe. "Your heart was wise. Now we must help Kabelo see the difference between duty and love. He is not a bad man, but he has not yet learned this lesson." It was arranged that they would all meet, Naledi, Kabelo, and his parents. Such gatherings, in Botswana, were never easy, for family carried heavy weight. Yet Ma Ramotswe believed the presence of both detectives, and perhaps even Ma Makutsi's sharp tongue, would help to guide the conversation. The meeting took place at Kabelo's homestead. The yard was swept clean, the cattle kraal tidy, as if the earth itself had been prepared for judgment. Kabelo's father sat proudly beneath a shade tree, his posture declaring his herds were plentiful. Kabelo himself stood beside him, tense and defensive, while his mother looked on with worry in her eyes. Naledi arrived with her uncle, for her parents were too upset to attend. Ma Ramotswe began with courtesy, greeting each in turn, for without respect no truth could be spoken. She then turned to Kabelo. "Rara, we are not here to accuse. We are here to understand. Naledi has refused the ring. She did so not because she despises you, but because the ring carried no warmth. Tell us, why did you give her that ring?" Kabelo shifted uneasily. "It was a ring. It was fine gold. What does it matter whose it was? A ring is a ring." Mama Kutsi gasped loudly. "A ring is not just a ring. A woman is not a shelf where you put something that belonged to another. That is," she caught herself, remembering perhaps that shouting was not the way. She folded her arms tightly, muttering under her breath about 97% of men not knowing what mattered. Naledi's uncle cleared his throat. "Young man, you must answer more carefully. Why did you not choose something yourself?" Kabelo's voice rose in frustration. "Because it was convenient. My cousin had it, and it was expensive, and it was good enough. Do you not see? My father has cattle, my family has land. I will take care of Naledi. Why is this ring so important?" It was then that Ma Ramotswe leaned forward, her tone gentle, not accusing. "Because, Ra, a ring is not a piece of gold. It is a promise, and a promise must be made fresh for the person who receives it. It cannot be borrowed. Would you, who are proud of your cattle, give Naledi a cow that has been rejected by another family? Would you offer her something that was thrown back as unworthy? No, you would not. Then why offer her a ring with such a history?" The words, simple and direct, struck Kabelo harder than any scolding could. He looked down, silent, as if ashamed. His father frowned, uncomfortable with the truth, but unable to dismiss it. His mother's eyes softened toward Naledi, as if seeing her pain for the first time. Finally, Kabelo said, quietly, "I did not think. I thought a ring was just a ring. I did not understand what it meant." Naledi's uncle nodded gravely. "Then you must learn, boy. A marriage cannot be built on carelessness. It must be built on attention, on seeing the other person clearly." Naledi herself gathering her courage, spoke. "Kabilo, I do not wish for riches. I do not need cattle or perfumes. I need only to feel that you see me, Naledi, not just a bride who makes your family proud." There was silence, broken only by the sound of a cow shifting in the kraal. Kabelo looked at her then, really looked, and his expression softened. "You are right, Naledi. I have been proud, and I have been careless. I will return the ring. I will find another, one that is only for you. But more than that, I will try to show you that I see you." His words, though halting, carried sincerity. Ma Ramotswe, who had watched many men struggle with their own hearts, felt a quiet satisfaction. Here was the beginning of change, small but real. The meeting ended with no quarrel, which in itself was a victory. Kabelo's father muttered something about young people being too particular, but his mother pressed Naledi's hand in hers. And as they left, Ma Ramotswe reflected that this was detective work at its best. Not catching criminals, but helping people step onto a better path. Back at the agency later, Grace Makutsi was still indignant. "Imagine, Ma, to give a girl a second-hand ring. I would have thrown it in his face." Ma Ramotswe chuckled softly. "Perhaps, Ma, but Naledi did not throw it. She simply said no. That was enough. Now Kabelo has learned something he will not forget." Said Grace, though her shoes tapped out a rhythm that suggested she still wanted harsher justice. That evening, when Ma Ramotswe sat on her veranda with her husband, she told him of the meeting. Mr. J.L.B. Matakoni listened, nodding as the children played in the yard nearby. "It is good," he said at last. "A man can learn if someone shows him. I once gave a client the wrong spare part. It did not fit, and the car rattled. But after that, I always checked twice. Kabelo will check his heart twice, I think." Ma Ramotswe laughed. "You and your spare parts, Ra. But yes, you are right. That is all that is needed. Checking twice to be sure the heart fits." She gazed out over the land, feeling a sense of peace. The case was not about rings at all, not truly. It was about the courage to demand sincerity and the humility to learn it. In Botswana, as in life, these were the things that mattered most. Over the next few days, even after the truth had been spoken at Kabelo's homestead, and even after Naledi had been reassured that her instincts were wise rather than shameful, Ma Ramotswe felt that her work was not quite done. A case may find its solution in a single conversation, yes, but its resolution often required time, like stew that must simmer until the flavours come together. Hearts, she knew, did not change at the speed of words. They required patience, reminders, and the gentle encouragement of those who loved them. And so, in the days that followed, she found herself thinking often of Kabelo and Naledi. She hoped that his promise, to see her truly, to choose for her and not for convenience, would be kept. But she also knew that young men, especially those surrounded by cattle and the voices of proud fathers, could forget. The memory of shame might fade, and the old patterns return. This was not cynicism on her part. It was realism, born of years of listening to people who had sworn they would change, only to slip back again when life became comfortable. At the agency, Ma Grace Makutsi was still indignant. She had turned the case into a sort of parable, which she repeated to anyone who would listen. "Imagine a second-hand ring," she exclaimed to a client who had come in about a missing relative. "It is like reusing an old pair of spectacles. They might work, but they do not fit the eyes. She told the story again to Futi Radifuti one evening, wagging her finger so firmly that he almost tipped over a bowl of soup in his eagerness to nod agreement. Her shoes, too, seemed to have opinions on the matter. When she walked into the office each morning, their click against the floor sounded sharper than usual, as if they were tapping out a judgment. Careless, careless, careless. Ramotswe listened with amusement, but also with patience. "Yes, Ma," she said, when Grace recounted for the 10th time the folly of Kabelo. "But remember, we must not only judge, we must also hope. A man may make a foolish choice once, but he may learn better if given the chance." Grace pursed her lips. "Perhaps, but if Futi had ever done such a thing, I would have returned him at once, like a kettle that does not boil." Privately, Ramotswe thought that she might not have returned him quite so quickly, for Futi's kindness was like a steady river, but she did not say so. Grace needed to feel the full strength of her victory, for it was her nature to carry her pride like a shield, and shields, though heavy, sometimes kept people safe. Meanwhile, life at Tlokweng Road Speedy Motors carried on in its familiar way. The apprentices, perhaps inspired by overhearing their employers talk of rings and marriage, began to tease each other loudly about who would marry first and what sort of rings they would buy. One declared he would give his future wife a ring the size of a wheel nut. The other retorted that he would give his wife not a ring at all, but a car tire, so she will never lose it. Mr. J.L.B. Matacone, overhearing them, shook his head in despair. "You two know nothing of these things. You must first learn to change spark plugs properly before you can speak of wives." Still, there was humour in their foolishness, and it reminded Ramotswe that men, young and old, often struggled to understand the mysteries of the heart. That was why patience was so important. Just as an old car needed many gentle attempts before the engine started, so too did a man need gentle prodding before he learned the true ways of love. One afternoon, Naledi returned alone to the agency. She looked different this time, not weighed down with shame, but lighter, as if hope had entered her life again. She carried no ring, but her eyes carried something brighter. "Kabelo has spoken to me," she said. "He told me he will choose another ring, but he has not done so yet. Instead, he has begun to ask me what I like, what I enjoy. Yesterday he brought me a basket of guavas, because he remembered I once said they were my favourite. They were not expensive, not like perfumes, but they were chosen for me." Her voice trembled with joy, and both detectives felt their hearts warm. This was the beginning of what Ramotswe had hoped, a turning not toward pride, but toward attention, that most necessary of all gifts. "That is good news, Ma," said Ramotswe, smiling. "You see, it is not the price that matters. It is the thought. A ring may be gold, but without thought it is worthless. A guava, chosen with care, is worth more than any diamond." Grace agreed, though she could not resist adding, "Still, I hope he will buy a proper ring. Even guavas rot, you know." They all laughed, and in that laughter was the sound of peace returning. Later that week, she dropped by the orphan farm again. Ma Potokwane slid across more fruitcake, unsurprised. "Your bride was right to refuse a cold promise," she said. "Kabelo is learning," replied Ramotswe. "He has begun to listen." "There is always hope," the matron nodded. "That is why we bake cakes, why we raise children, why we fix cars." The matron's words, though simple, struck deeply. Yes, hope was what kept Botswana steady, even in times of drought or disappointment. And perhaps it was hope, more than detective work, that had truly solved this case. By the time evening fell on Zebra Drive that Friday, the case felt closed. Not closed like a locked box, but closed like a door gently shut after a conversation had ended well. There would be more for Naledi and Kabelo to learn, of course, for no marriage was free of lessons. But the path ahead was no longer one of cold obligation. It was one of chosen kindness. That evening, the veranda once again became the stage for reflection. Ma Ramotswe sat with her cup of red bush tea, watching the sky turn from gold to purple. Mr. J.L.B. Matakoni joined her, lowering himself into the chair with a sigh of honest fatigue after a long day with the apprentices. The smell of earth and cattle drifted faintly on the breeze. She told him of Naledi's visit, of the guavas, of the promise of a new ring. He listened, as he always did, with patience and without interruption. When she had finished, he nodded. "It is good," he said simply. "That young man is learning to see. That is all that matters." "Yes," she agreed. "So many people go through life without really seeing those beside them. They look at cattle, or at cars, or at shoes, but not at hearts." The silence that followed was companionable. The foster children laughed somewhere in the yard, chasing each other in the half-light. A donkey brayed in the distance, indignant at the encroaching night. The land settled into its quiet rhythm, as it had for generations. Ma Ramotswe leaned back, content. Cases would always come. Missing goats, dishonest clerks, husbands who strayed, wives who suspected. But each case was really about the same thing. The human heart, in all its confusion and courage. And if the No. 1 Ladies Detective Agency could help even one person find clarity, then it was enough. She lifted her cup. "To hope," she murmured, though only the evening air heard her words. And in the deepening twilight, Botswana itself seemed to answer. In the rustle of acacia leaves, in the laughter of children, in the steady thrum of life that reminded her, once again, that kindness and patience would always be the best detectives of all.